There's an ice cream parlor at the corner of Reseda Boulevard and Ventura Boulevard that I visit regularly. I love going to this particular spot for a number of reasons. One, they have maybe 20 flavors available at a time. Two, they change their flavors about every month. Three, they make their ice cream from scratch. And four, it's very close to my house. Oh, and there's this weird rusty megaphone across the street from it that I would always notice and stare at. As someone who's very much into military history, I had one thought the first time I noticed it. That's probably a warning siren. When and why it was installed, I couldn't quite figure out just from looking at it from the ice cream parlor. But other questions piqued my interest. Why is it still there? Does it still work? At some point, I went back to this ice cream parlor per usual, this time with an older friend. I pointed out the siren to him as a topic of interest, hoping to start a conversation that would maybe bring me more answers about it. And more answers it brought me. "Oh yeah," he said. "That's an old air raid siren. There's a couple of others close to where I live." Of course there are more, I thought. And soon after this revelation, I did begin to notice them. Maybe one or two more on intersections that I would regularly drive through, and I was amazed. How come I've never noticed these before? As I conducted more research on these sirens, however, I was excited and somewhat alarmed to find that there were even more sirens, all in locations that I regularly drive through but have never even seen. I started a scavenger hunt based on a list I found online. There's an amateur historian named Dennis Hanley who had compiled locations for nearly 75% of the sirens found throughout LA County, and I was able to use his map and an official list for my search. There was something thrilling about finding these sirens that have been standing for maybe 50 to 70 years but have never even been noticed. It's like finding hidden treasure that's been right in front of you this whole time. And for each one I found, I kept asking each of them, "Why are you still here?"
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air.
The sirens were installed as a part of the attack warning system that the government put in place in 1942, immediately after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. However, after World War II ended, the system would take on a new connotation of civil defense during the Cold War.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
As a vital part of civil defense measures, these sirens were regularly tested and drills were regularly administered to ensure the feigned safety of all LA County residents. As if, ducking and covering under your desk would spare you from a nuclear warhead. But better safe than sorry, I guess. Those who have lived in LA for the last half century clearly remember these tests.
You grew up in the neighborhood?
Right down the street, yes.
And you remember this siren when it was being tested?
This exact one, yes. It was always tested on the last Friday of the month at 10 a.m. And I remember on one occasion hearing it and riding up here feverishly on my bicycle to get close to it just to see how loud it really was. And it was very loud.
So after all this research, I was able to figure out why they were installed. But why they were installed doesn't exactly tell me why they're still standing. We're no longer at war with the Japanese, and there's no longer a Soviet Union that relayed empty threats of assured mutual destruction.
It seems like whenever there's a construction project nearby or something, that's when they're removed. But apparently for lack of funds to remove them, they're just pretty much abandoned in place.
Many Cold War and local city historians felt that the removal of the sirens symbolized a deliberate erasure of the past. One or two were thus premeditatedly spared from removal and destruction, one of which now resides in the Vending Museum's collection. And for those that could not be spared, they continue to exist in an official government list and in photographs and video clips in which they were inadvertently captured. Interestingly enough, They continue to stand, and yet no one is bothered to pay notice to them. One of Susan Laystar's criteria for infrastructure is that it becomes visible upon breakdown. In this particular case, it has become completely invisible upon breakdown. Well, then, maybe it's actually not the infrastructure that broke down. Maybe it was actually the conditions and the culture which gave birth and purpose to this infrastructure that broke down. Maybe this infrastructure actually still very much works. And maybe that's why it still remains very invisible. Sometime in the last month, I drove past Siren number 108 at the corner of Reseda Boulevard and Lassen Street, and I noticed something very peculiar. I thought I saw the megaphone head rotating left and right. It was a very windy evening, so I wondered if it was just the wind that was moving it. As I continued my research on the Sirens, I found out that that particular model is indeed a rotating one, that it would move side to side whenever the siren was activated. And that really made me wonder, was it being tested that night? Was it just the wind? Or was it all just my imagination?